My name is Tracy Wilson-Rossman. I'm coming to you from beautiful Montgomery County in my home office, and I am Chief Marketing Officer of Chariot Solutions. We started a new channel on our YouTube channel called 15 Minutes With, and what we're going to be trying to do over the next several weeks, we'll see how this goes. We're going to be talking to thought leaders in the Philadelphia region to start with about what they're doing in tech. And we're going to expand not just from the software standpoint, but we're also going to be talking to folks who are in our maker community, manufacturing, to sort of give a fuller view of what's happening in the Philadelphia region. So several weeks ago, I was lucky enough to sit on this judging panel with Kade Anthony over at EFE Manufacturing. He's a Drexel grad, I'm a Drexel grad, and we got to see these bioengineers and mechanical engineers who were pitching to get some money for their senior projects. It was fascinating for me because most of the events that I wind up judging are more business startups, software startups. So to see these different types of mechanical manufactured hardware-based startups was very, it was fascinating. And I was lucky enough to meet Kade. So he's gonna introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his background.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Tracy, for having me on. I think it's a great idea, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So yeah, I recently graduated from Drexel this past June. So to give you a little bit of background, I currently work at EFE Laboratories. We're a electromechanical contract manufacturer in Bucks County. Electromechanical effectively means that any consumer, commercial, electronic, we can effectively produce in-house. In some cases, we're building highly customized electronic solutions for various industry manufacturing companies. In other cases, we're doing full-scale production lines for mature biomedical companies, telecommunication companies. So we kind of do a mixed bag of different types of electronic manufacturing projects. To give a little bit of background on myself, I've been in manufacturing since I was actually in middle school. I started a summer job at EFE actually when I was I think 7th or 8th grade. And, I was out on the floor just building things, putting things together, soldering, wiring various electronics. And from there, the passion was just kind of ignited in me. I was really interested in the underlying processes and the technology that I was working on. And one thing led to another, decided to go and study engineering at Drexel. While I was at Drexel, I did a lot of research with drones and autonomy with drones. So for my senior design project, and part of the reason that I ended up being in a position to be a co-panelist on a senior design judging panel with Tracy is we developed a autonomous response drone for maritime emergencies. So someone goes overboard on a ship, we designed a drone that will go find the individual in the water, drop them flotation means, and return to the ship. So from there, I kind of got just embedded in the regional entrepreneurial space for tech companies. And with that, now I've gone back post-graduation to EFE, where I'm working as an engineer, and I'm currently working with EFE in our core skill set to kind of go and develop a platform right now where early stage tech companies can go and become acclimated to our more professional manufacturing resources and kind of take their prototype from prototype to mature manufacturable product. So that's kind of some of the stuff that I'm working on right now, and kind of where I came from to get where I'm at right now.
So, when I got to meet you and also Ken Tomlinson over at NextFab on the panel, I was a little surprised to see that there is this small, I'm going to call it small scale manufacturing, located in our region. Mm-hmm. What do you see happening in the Philadelphia marketplace and actually further out that is encouraging businesses to do small, I can't get this out, small scale manufacturing? And do you see that, growing within our community?
Sure. Yeah. So there is a ton of small scale manufacturing in the greater Philadelphia region. To kind of give you a background into like what that means to me, it effectively means that we are kind of filling the gaps for larger design companies in some cases, larger manufacturers in some cases, and in some cases we're doing full-scale production for various electronics. There's really two core types of companies that we're going to work with. The mature manufacturing companies. So for example, in the Lehigh Valley region, you have a ton of large-scale manufacturers up there. In particular, one that I work with is called Lutron. They do the dimming switch that's probably for me right now, I'm sitting in my basement, I'm looking on the wall and I've got a dimming switch for my lighting system and it's a Lutron. So they're effectively embedded in just about any house that has lighting in it. And they predominantly just focus on manufacturing dimming switches, and something that we've aligned with them to help with is actually doing their testing equipment. That they go and they need to validate that their dimmer that they build in their line is functional and ready to go to Home Depot once it's finished on their line. They don't really want to worry about producing that testing equipment in-house. It dilutes their focus of focusing on manufacturing dimmers. So in that case, we go and we align as a small scale manufacturer with them, provide our engineering expertise, work with their functional requirements, and actually manufacture and help design some of that testing equipment. And just about any large scale manufacturer is going to have a need of that scope, in the testing equipment realm. And then sometimes if Lutron, for example, doesn't have the space in their production facility in Lehigh Valley, maybe they'll hand off, the production of a complete finished good to us, and we'll establish a miniature line in our facility and we'll go and work through the production of that. So aside from the more mature types of companies like that, we will quite often work with local tech startups, and kind of, like I mentioned, we try to provide that path to maturity so that they can have something that can be mass produced. The greater Philadelphia region has an abundance of really powerful universities, and there's so many really impressive tech startups that come out of that infrastructure. So from that perspective, this region is really rich with different manufacturing resources to really aid the development of those different startups.
So, we do have to touch a little bit on what's happening right now with COVID-19, the disruption of supply chains. But even before this, a lot of people felt that you have to go to China to do some of this early build. And what were you seeing around that? And I would just like you to comment if you can give a prediction of what you think is going to happen post when we get back to some form of normalcy.
Sure. So something that we would see embedded in a lot of the early stage opportunities that we would work with, in 2019, let's say, before this entire COVID outbreak came to be, everyone has this impression that if they want to reach a mass manufacturing state, they have to source out as much of it as they can to China, because the cost of goods over there is just dramatically less than here, because they pay less on labor, they're closer to the raw material sources. Overall, you couple all that together and typically the cost is reduced. But what we started to see in late December, early January is complete shutdown of manufacturing and supply chain from China. And it was a pretty big red flag to us when we saw that, because that means that you've got hundreds of millions of dollars just in our immediate frame of reference in terms of raw componentry and stuff like that all of a sudden is not in motion.
Right.
And obviously the opportunity cost of that to American-based companies that we were helping service is immense, because all of a sudden we're not able to ship them finished goods, and they're not able to ship those finished goods to their customers, and all of a sudden their revenue forecasts have completely taken a hit. So that was a pretty direct instance of the risks associated with not having a diversified supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
We had all of most companies really had most of their eggs in the Asian market basket in terms of supply chain. My expectation is that you're going to see more companies want to kind of decentralize their supply chain. I think you'll probably see a bit of an exodus in terms of manufacturing in China. I think that you'll see large companies really look to kind of move things stateside. Maybe Mexico, India start to switch things up a little bit, so it's just not so heavily contingent on that one region. So that is something that we are beginning to see. I should preface it also. The trade war did go, and before COVID, the trade war did start to lead people in that direction, because they were realizing, okay, this is something that we're not sure how long the trade war is going to last. We're not sure if it's going to ever be recovered in a way that the cost is still as competitive. So, people were starting to lean this way for certain components and parts. But I think you're going to start to see that on a much more mass scale once the resolution for COVID is reached in the United States.
Right. So you said that you've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs. What advice would you have for entrepreneurs who are starting businesses that are hardware focused?
So it's a good question. Typically when you're a tech entrepreneur, you're really excited by getting a functional prototype together. And that's really your core focus. You want to just get the functional prototype together, prove your core functionality, it addresses the pain point that you're aiming to resolve. And, that is really your focus. Something that would distinct, a startup that is just fueled towards realizing that prototype and doesn't really have a vision beyond that, from one that really stands a chance of realizing maturity, is a design package that can be interpreted by an engineering team that's completely unfamiliar with the project. So what I mean by that is making sure that there is great documentation, making sure that there's extensive documentation regarding rev control. If you've made a design decision to not do one thing and do something in replacement of that one thing you were previously doing, make sure that it's well documented. That knowledge is valuable. You want to go and have a concise paper trail for all the decisions you've made. And the other thing I'd recommend to tech entrepreneurs is to definitely think about where you want to be 10 years from now. Think about what the fully commercially realized iteration of your product is. What's its form factor look like? What are its features? What specific applications are you hitting now? What applications beyond your initial target applications have you now grown into? And thinking about that forward-looking vision, think about how you can go and model your preliminary design, your foundational design, so that it may one day grow to become that 10-year version of your product. And one other big thing for me is, recently, as I mentioned, I worked on developing an autonomous drone that goes and responds to people that have gone overboard. Really big piece of what made us unsuccessful and then successful is, over the course of that project, we crashed our drone 3 to 4 times. We blew it up once, and each crash was a great lesson and something that we didn't understand. And after we crashed it, we learned, our lesson, and we would not make the same mistake again. My recommendation is, especially as I mentioned, in this region, there is a plethora of manufacturing resources, different design expertise. I mean, there's an expert for almost everything if you look hard enough. And I would recommend to any early stage tech entrepreneur, acknowledge what you know, acknowledge what you don't know. And for the things you don't know, find an expert for it, get their perspective applied to your situation if you can, and, save yourself the headache of crashing your drone,
So I'm going to sort of move on to a different discussion around, where you see this intersection. So, why did we think that we should potentially start talking to each other besides just knowing each other from a panel? We started talking about the intersection of hardware and software. So at Chariot, we've been doing, a lot of work in the Internet of Things space, smart homes. In fact, Lutron is one of our clients, so I didn't know that we shared that. We've done some back end work with them. But besides that, where do you see sort of, from your perspective, from the manufacturing side and the hardware side, where the hardware and the software interconnect? And we were having an interesting discussion about that before we came on air.
Yeah. So yeah, what I was mentioning to Tracy earlier is that, EFE in some cases, we've been manufacturing this piece of hardware for decades, and what we're finding is these pieces of hardware that we will have been building for decades once had a great, very well defined value proposition. It was serving the function it was designed to serve, and it was serving it well enough to sustain decades worth of repeat orders, and with incremental improvement. Now that we're seeing this shift towards how can I enhance my value proposition with software, we're realizing capabilities that existed in hardware that we never would have otherwise realized. I can give you kind of a cool example of one.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we build this device for it's called Suez. They're over in Trevos, and what it does is it goes in a cooling water cycle. So it's a check that will go and read cooling water that you're running through a power plant and see what the composition of the water is. And it historically, in the 20 decades we were building it, it was always a visual check. So basically you'd have an operator on site of the power plant that would have to go up to this device, look at it, and if it looked like clouded and white, that basically would mean that it the water needed to have some upstream treatment added to it so that you would have cleaner water, and you would have better longevity out of the water that you have in this cooling cycle. So recently, in the last 2 years, we worked with them on getting a new iteration employed that actually digitizes this data and then uploads it to a software platform. And ever since that has been integrated in the field, we've seen an increase in sales of these units of, I think, 400, 500%. And effectively, that's completely based on the fact that now that we have this data, it's being uploaded to the centralized cloud platform. They are directly connecting the data that this downstream process employs to dictate upstream processes. So autonomously now, rather than having to have that operator go and constantly check it, they can just have these upstream processes add the additive chemicals to the cooling water, reduce the adverse impacts that they would expect to see, and they're increasing the longevity, the cycle counts that they can actually get out of their cooling water, which is, especially in a world where water is becoming an all the more valuable commodity.
Right.
It's a really, it's a really important bit of value that this, well-established legacy product has effectively been reborn with, in the realization that this value exists. So, in a lot of ways, we see that. We see software going and completely redefining and expanding the value proposition of existing hardware.
So that's a really interesting point, because, we see a lot of people coming to us with new ideas, and new products. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to you, because there's not a lot of, we weren't aware of the manufacturing capabilities in this area. So it was great to know that. But on the flip side, to think that you're repurposing, you're bringing more life to an existing product without, you're innovating within that legacy, by using new techniques, I think is really fascinating. And I'm hoping that more companies have better understanding that they should be looking into investment, not just for new products, but to think about how they can use existing products, and how are they using that data that's coming off? How can they either connect to a mobile device so that it makes it easier for their operator to work that machinery, just making it more useful. And it just is, it's a great way to think about this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very difficult to anticipate upfront when you begin that process of integrating software. You never know all of the unique new avenues of value that can come out of that integration. And the beautiful thing about software too is like once you get in there to the point that you have the the digitizing means of kind of getting those data points out of your hardware, it's effectively endless, the possibilities. There's all kinds of optimization opportunities. Communication of that information can be valuable to different facets. It's just once you get your foot in the door to bringing the software realm into your hardware, the possibilities are kind of boundless.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because not that long ago, it was said that software was going to eat the world, and now it seems that hardware and software really do need to coexist, and they're sharing that world. So, Kade, thank you so much for your time. This was really, really fascinating. I actually can't wait till we can actually see the manufacturing space.
Absolutely.
So hopefully that'll be in a couple of weeks. Hopefully maybe we'll be able to come back on and talk about a project that we worked on together.
I'm hoping for that as well. That would be great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Great, thank you.